Welcome to Dege and Dragons.
I thought this was going to be hard.
Welcome to Dege and Dragons.
Who wants some of the Ripper?
They're state champs, baby. Woo!
He's completely capping. I'm a man of the people.
Shattered world.
Ripper knows. Ripper always knows. Degecast.
And welcome to another episode of the Degecast, where us degenerates take a look at tabletop role-playing games through a therapeutic lens. I'm your host, Nate Lindberg, producer, editor, and co-founder of the show, and you can follow me on Twitter at Nate Lindberg, and be sure to follow our show at Degetime. Now that I've gotten through a little bit of my egocentric introduction here, I've got a very special guest sitting with me in the co-host chair, as neither Conrad or Tony could seem to find some time to sit down with us here tonight. So, with, I believe, it's his fifth appearance now on the Degecast, and his first one as a host from It's Never Dark Enough, the creators of Shattered, a great friend of the show, Zip. Zip, hey, thank you for taking some time out for tonight and to fill in for those two slackers.
Happy to be here, man.
Hey, awesome to talk with you again. And without further ado, here on Dege and Dragons, we're in the midst of our Retrostar gameplay, where we're taking a look at family dynamics through their family nuclear campaign. Now, last time we were joined by Retrostar creator and the showrunner for our gameplay, Brack Blackburn, and now joining Zip and I here tonight is somebody who contributed to the Retrostar game a handful of years back, and he graciously agreed to talk a little turkey about Retrostar. Norbert Franz. Norbert, thank you so much for your time here today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you too, and hello again, Nate and Joshua.
Right now, very happy to have you here, and thanks for taking some time out. And basically, how this all came to be is he commented on our gameplay and said he had a little bit of involvement in Retrostar, and I was like, hey, you want to talk a little bit about it? And he was like, sure. So here we are. So. Normally what I will do is I will kick over to Conrad to get things started here and get the questions flowing, but Conrad ain't here. So I guess, Zip, you want to try, or you want me to give it a shot?
Yeah, I can give it a go.
All right. Throwing you to the wolves right off the bat.
Right off the bat. That's good. I like that. So how did you get involved with Retrostar? I mean, I'm not involved with the roleplay group, but I checked it out earlier when Nate asked me to hop on with him today, and it looks really, really cool. I can't wait to dig into it a bit further.
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, I became part of the writing team, and basically a bunch of people who helped this game along the way, helped create it. Because I was already with Spectrum Games, and I'd been contributing to the Spectrum Games really, like all of their products,
Sure.
for several years. By the time that idea came around, the idea first came up, or when I first heard about it was in our internal secret Facebook group in 2012, right? Because we are all in very different places. I'm in Germany, I still live in my hometown in northern Bavaria in Germany.
Nice.
So from the beginning, I only had contact to Cynthia from Spectrum Games through email, and in the very early days, this was before contemporary social media. We had Yahoo groups. Remember the old e-groups, which became Yahoo groups.
I do remember those.
A lot of gaming-related groups on Yahoo groups. And to give you a very short summary of how that went down, was almost 20 years ago, 2001, toward the very end of 2001. And I was a gamer. I was a fan of comic books, wrestling, professional wrestling.
That's right up my alley.
Right. I was also a fan of like the 80s franchises and the 80s action figures, including Masters of the Universe, Transformers, right? And for a bunch of years, I had tried to come up with a role-playing game system for Masters of the Universe, and
nice.
we had experimented with that, and I talked to other fans who had experimented with sort of the same thing. And some people had come from D&D and some people had come from the superhero games. And then we figured out, well, we can use one of the existing superhero games and put He-Man into it, Man-at-Arms, Battle-Cat, everybody.
Nice.
And I remember there were several systems that I looked at, and we always tried to figure out a magic system for Orko. Well, I did that, you got to bring in Orko, And anyway, I had Masters of the Universe stats written up for Hero system at one point. I had them in the Fusion system. I was quite supportive, when Fusion was still new. That system came from, I don't know if you're familiar, it was part Hero system and part Interlock from Cyberpunk. But anyway, that isn't much detail, right? So that was the late 90s, and then going into the 2000s, I wasn't exactly happy with the stuff that I'd come up with, and I used it at the gaming table with the various people. I took it to conventions, kind of make my own unofficial Masters of the Universe game. And anyway, the first one, since it had superhero rules, that wound up a little more superhero-y. It was and then we figured, well, we don't really need all of those rules, and we don't need lethal damage for this, or some of the attacks, the powers, they don't really work out the way we had imagined them, or we remembered them from the cartoon. Then we went to a more traditional fantasy, a medieval sword and sorcery system. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's cool, and it works, and you can use different dice. The numbers turn out a little differently. But then, basically you have a medieval sword and sorcery system, and anyway, I'd taken it through various systems, and of course, since we didn't have a license from Mattel, you couldn't release any of that. But we were fans of it, it's like, doing our own stuff with it, had fun. And then it was 2001. It was just before New Year's. When Cynthia had left a message on the Yahoo group, and she said, I want to create a game about the Saturday morning cartoons, right? Yep. And it was on the Masters of the Universe, Motu group, where I was hung out. And she was looking for people to basically read the manuscript, and comment on it, and help that text come into being, Sure. And and I was very interested in editing, and I'd done some proofreading and translating before that, as a university student, I did some translating, and in fact, my first major translation was also for a game, for a tabletop game.
Oh, cool!
Cool. That's awesome.
I'm simply going to offer my skills now, and then I went to a New Year's party. It was December 31st. I go to my party, and I think I got pretty wasted. And then I returned in the early hours of January 1st. As
you do on New Year's.
Right, yeah. And I went back on my computer. It was January 1st, 2002, and there was a response from Cynthia Miller, right? And then we really hit it off, really well. And I became one of the play testers. We said, okay, we're going to read this now, and we're going to test these rules, and see whether the numbers work. And we'll look for, passages in the rules that may not be, easy to understand. So I just basically started reading, and then I sent in comments, right? And as time went on, I sent in more comments, and then I started making suggestions on the rules, I was like, okay, maybe you should rephrase that or rename this and that, or maybe you don't need a +1 here, that should be a +2 or something. That was basically my level of contribution. And then that year went on, and I got really, really absorbed, as they say these days, you go into a rabbit hole, right? And for most of it, I was researching my favorites from the 80s. We found out that, at that point, there was already a big wave of this 80s nostalgia. Everybody was longing for, I remember He-Man and Brave Star and such and such.
Sure.
Yeah, and that also was the year when they brought back the cartoon, right? a new cartoon really. That was the Mark Young Studios, right? Mark Young Productions. Anyway, that started later that summer, and said, how fortuitous, here we are creating our 1980s retro cartoon game at the very time that they're bringing back Masters of the Universe, and maybe there's going to be a big fan base, and this is going to be huge, right? And we were quite optimistic with that. But it was also the first product that Cynthia finished and finished for publication, right?
Sure.
Then we had a finished game that summer.
Is that game Cartoon Action Hour?
It's Cartoon Action Hour, right?
Okay, cool. Because we're actually going to be playing Cartoon Action Hour a little bit later on in the series.
That's fine, yeah. So almost 20 years ago, we created the first edition of that. I mean, we didn't know that there were going to be 3 editions, right?
Sure.
And I recently wrote to Cynthia and I said, do you know that we've been doing this for almost 20 years, and when we started, the 1980s were roughly 20 years ago, right? And now it's 40 years, and we can now create our own nostalgia game about ourselves because we did that 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
A self tribute, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, that became really the flagship of Spectrum Games, and it was first a PDF, and I think there was an era where games as PDF only was still pretty new, right?
Sure.
And I remember they put the PDF on a CD, right? And they created a little paper cover, and they took the CD to a gaming shop in Kansas, right? And they tried to sell those CDs on the counter, right?
That's awesome.
Copies, right?
Yep.
And people didn't know what it was, right? Is this music? What is a video game on it, right?
Right.
Because it was still unusual to have a full game
PDF, yeah.
Right. And then a year or so later, that was actually published in paper. And I was all about paper books. I'm a paper book guy, right? I'm basically the traditionalist within the team. But 2003, Zev Schlesinger, who was running Zeman Games at the time, he was making board games, but he also had a corner in his publishing company for role-playing games. He later left role-playing games, but 2003 he had offered Cynthia to get that game out in as a soft cover, right? And there was new artwork done for that. Now, what I had done at that point was that I created the stats for Cynthia's characters in what was her tribute to Masters of the Universe, right? Like there are many cartoon worlds that you can play this game in. There's no unified Cartoon Action Hour world, right?
Right.
And I usually have to explain this to people because in Germany most of the RPGs are very setting focused. They're all tied to a specific world. So imagine having D&D, but D&D is always the Forgotten Realms, right?
Okay. Yep.
Most of the games are like that. And the most frequent question I hear is always, well, what is your world? How does this world
it's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, right. Anyway, that's the prevalent attitude, and then people often act surprised when I say, well, it's your thing, right?
Yeah. But
anyway, there's a thing called the Warriors of the Cosmos. Okay, so the Warriors of the Cosmos was kind of her idea what Masters of the Universe could be like in a parallel universe, right?
Okay.
You don't have He-Man per se. You don't have Man-at-Arms. You don't have a Skeletor, but you can kind of see the similarities, right?
Sure.
And it also has some influences from other cartoons, but I cannot explain all that. Anyway, that's one of the fictitious cartoons that you can find in that book, and we expanded that to a more sizable world setting, which we called the series book, right?
Yeah.
And if you can find an old first edition, and they don't have to, but the old first edition of Cartoon Action Hour had one of the star symbols on the cover, and it said 2 books in one, right? Because you got the rules and you got the series, the series.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So Cynthia had made up some names for the heroes and villains, and I created their stats, and then the way we did it was we kind of imagined what the action figure would look like, Okay, you've got the action figure with the extendable arm, or you got the guy who has the thunder punch or the whatever, or you got a guy with 2 heads or with stomping foot or something. And so you put one special thing on this action figure, or an extra weapon, extra accessory, and those things are usually abilities in Cartoon Action Hour.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and at the time, let's call them superpowers and magic and special things, they were called the special abilities. And since I had created so many of them, they called me Master of the Special Abilities Rules, and I'd
Excellent.
never competed for that, but then said, oh, Norbert is the master of the special abilities rules, because I made those stat blocks. I said, okay, he is getting the extra die here, and this, and she does the whatever magic arrow, and it was nice. That all changed through the editions, but there's still something to that effect. It's now simpler, I hope, but
yeah,
that's what I did. And when the book came out, I didn't know what my status was with the company, right? And I said, okay, I'm not the writer, because Cynthia Miller wrote most of the text, and you don't have to put my name up front on the cover. But she said, well, you've done much more than proofreading, and I didn't have a concept or okay, what is this? I suggested a few things. And she was very gracious, and then she put me in as additional writing. So
Excellent.
That was my break into it. So in the credits, it always says additional writing by, right?
Yeah.
And something, so I got my name in as editor and additional writing. And since, I like staying with people who are so appreciative, who I get along with, right?
Absolutely.
I stayed with them through the years, and then created supplements, and then responded to fans on the mailing list, and then went through quite a stretch with Cartoon Action Hour when that was our only game. Cynthia had other things planned that she couldn't publish at the time. She created some stuff that was done by another publisher, but she designed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was at the end of that decade, actually, 2008, we went into Cartoon Action Hour Season 2. And the following year, she said, we want to create another game that will not be 80s nostalgia and, cartoon heroes. And I said, okay, what was the next thing? And she said, teen slasher movies, teen slasher movies.
Excellent.
Friday the 13th, Halloween, right? And you kill the player characters one by one. There's one survivor. You have to figure out who the sole survivor is by the end of the movie. And that became Slasher Flick, the role-playing game.
I actually haven't heard it. I didn't hear of that one yet. No.
That was the second big creation. And then every game since then has basically been devoted to a media genre, right? We did one for film noir. We did one for anthology horror, and let's see, 2012 we had a superhero game that Barack wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And that superhero game originally didn't have a name. I mean, it kind of had a name that we didn't use, and it then came out under the name Capes, Cowls, and Villains Foul.
Okay. Yep.
Love it.
I do like that.
Yeah, that's a fun system, Also one that I took to conventions a lot, I was the missionary for Capes, Cowls, and Villains Foul.
Were you going to cons over here, or over where you are in Germany?
In Germany, really.
Okay.
I had made plans, there were vague plans of me going to Gen Con and meeting up to them. But with money and with our day jobs changing and everything, that really never happened, right? And I still want to go, and now last year all the cons were canceled, obviously.
Right.
But we're now doing promotion digitally. I'm attended a few virtual events. Are we doing some of the Spectrum games? Cynthia is busy with another project right now. Barack is as well.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly going to take Spectrum game stuff to some virtual events, this summer, and then let's see. Anyway, in October, for example, there's a Masters of the Universe fan event, right?
Oh, perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah.
In Hanau, Germany, right? So I don't know. It will be a little differently, but in most of the past decade, I traveled to the various game events in Germany, and our conventions were usually between 50 people and maybe 2,000 people, right?
Yep.
So there isn't anything as big as Gen Con or Origins.
Sure.
But if you get 1,000 gamers in a hall, that's considered really big.
Yeah.
Anyway, and also I got to tell you that Spectrum Games is not really known in Germany, and none of these games were translated.
Okay.
Right. I do have a translation of Capes, Cowls, and Villains Foul that went unpublished.
Yep.
And there's still a few legal things, with the artwork, and I have to see. It's theoretically possible that someone's going to publish it.
Sure.
Okay, and
it's funny. I didn't even think about that, translating it into different languages. Like, I don't know why that didn't even cross my mind as something that you would need to do to get your games internationally and things like that.
Mostly, yeah. I mean, when I started playing in the 90s, you had to get most of the material in English, right? It was all British American books. And I know a bunch of people who basically improved their school English through tabletop gaming, right?
Yep.
I also met people who say, well, they really improved their math skills through tabletop gaming.
Yep.
And I think in about the last 10 to 15 years, I don't know exactly what changed, whether this is, a question of attitude, or it's just people, not being so cool with foreign languages anymore. But most of the people here in Germany want the material in German, right?
Sure.
Even if not bilingual, right?
Yep.
They would prefer to have everything translated for them. Yeah, and most of the big things do get translated, sooner or later.
Mm-hmm.
The Star Wars game, the Star Trek game.
Yep.
Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition took a long time to be translated, but it was. I'm friends with the people who translated Pathfinder.
Oh, cool. Nice.
I translated a volume of Traveller.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. That's cool.
A bunch of things. Yeah. And speaking of translating, I'm the translator of icons.
Oh, okay. All right.
Most of my time recently, icon superpowered role playing.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now back to Retrostar. You wanted to Retrostar. It was 2012. Like I said, the superhero game had just been published. It came out in August, I think, and then since I was preparing for this podcast, I went back and I was actually looking up our old messages, right?
Oh wow! So you still had those? That's awesome.
Yes, some of the stuff is gone if it was just in email, but
sure, yeah.
I dug through the old stuff on Facebook. Is what I did, and then the earliest mention that I found was from like September or October of that year. And at the time, my friend Cynthia said, I already have ideas for the next projects, and it'll be all different, and they'll be for a different audience, different genre this time. And now instead of 1980s, I want to go further back. I want to go to the 70s.
Yep.
And in the beginning, I thought, now we can basically go through the motions, and create a volume with the same rules, but have 70s style artwork, and
Sure,
70s.
yeah.
And she said, no, that's not what we'll do. This will not be like Cartoon Action Hour with the 70s, but we'll create a game that really, speaks for that era, for what it was like, in pop culture, in music, and in fashion, and its attitudes were like in the 70s. And it's going to be for live action science fiction television. So a very specific idea.
Yes.
So, okay. And she said, okay, don't think Star Wars. I know Star Wars in 1977, but that was a movie, and there already is a Star Wars game that somebody else published. I don't want to do a movie game. I want to do a television game. I want to do episodic television, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you tell a story, in episodes. I said, okay, fine. And it has to be science fiction, and it has to be from the 70s. Now, I knew 3 series. I knew The $6 Million Man, but not very well. I knew Battlestar Galactica and that Buck Rogers show with Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray.
Okay, yep.
The one that they created after Battlestar Galactica.
I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the name of the show either, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Buck Rogers. And then I had to ask, my American friends, what are the other shows? I mean, I kind of knew Battlestar Galactica and Buck. And they said, well, that's fine because you already have the 2 most important names, from that era.
Yeah.
And they said, well, you might want to look at Land of the Lost from the mid-70s.
Oh, yep.
The original Land of the Lost with the puppets. So I got that. I had to look it up. And it's actually sitting in this room. It's up here. I got me this box, of
Excellent.
Lost, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
So, yeah. And since
it's been a long time since I've seen that. A long time.
Yeah. So, I mean, we research each and every one of those things, even if very little of that ends up in our book. So I learned what SLE stacks were. I learned that there was a language created for this series, that the Pakuni spoke. Anyway, and there was a lot of interesting stuff created in the 70s. But it was always on a budget, right? And of course, the budget was pretty limited, and that was built into the game, right? In the case of Cartoon Action Hour, we made the rules reflect, cartoon reality, cartoon physics, and everybody's shooting lasers, but nobody's getting really hurt.
Right. Cartoon Action Hour can get ridiculous. We've already filmed it. We filmed it, just the episodes haven't come out yet, and it can get very ridiculous very quickly. I loved it.
Which one did you want? Did you take a pre-made series or?
So what we did with Cartoon Action Hour, and this I guess is a little bit of a spoiler for you guys, the rest of you guys watching here, but whatever, I'm going to spoil it anyway. What we did with Cartoon Action Hour is Conrad. We always have 4 people playing, either 4 or 5. We had 4 people for Cartoon Action Hour. Conrad asked each one of us to come up with an idea for a show. And what he told us he was going to do was take the best idea and turn that into the actual game. But what he did was ended up coming up with 5 short stories, because he also created an idea as well. He came up with 5 short stories, and we ran those over the course of a few episodes. So we actually basically played 5 short games with Cartoon Action Hour in a either 12 or 14 episode series, which is a lot of fun. We came up with some interesting things like detective toilets. That's fun.
Very nice. And, I haven't played any of those in a while, right?
Sure.
I haven't run RetroStar or Cartoon Action Hour. It's really been a while. But if you ask me now, everything comes back, right?
Right.
I could just get my dice bag, and a couple of notes, and run it tonight. But anyway, when we decided to do RetroStar, again, that also didn't have a name. It was called the 70s Project, or the 70s sci-fi game.
Yep.
And we later got the name because we had kind of an audience contest, right?
Sure.
Cynthia said, people should just suggest names, and we put them all into a hat. We picked the name that we liked best, and it was quite a list of names we got.
I do like RetroStar as a name because it certainly. It basically, it tells you exactly what it is right off the bat. It's just like a retro science fiction game.
It's nice. I remember two people had come up with that, and they both got the award, the little prize for that.
Nice.
It was just one person had submitted the name spelled as two words, retro and star, and somebody else had also named it. There are a bunch of other names, one of them was warning. Imagine that on the cover, just warning.
I like that too.
So we said we wanted to have something that can create your own series as if it were made for television in the 70s.
Yep.
So you want to be flexible. And we always say we're not going to create a game that has a big list of attributes and skills, and then you build things, and because other games have already done that.
Right.
And we said we're only going to use what we actually need to tell television stories. Because
the focus in that game is really narrative. There's a lot of focus on the narrative story rather than stats and like the crunchy things of the game. I definitely appreciate that. I like that.
Yeah, I think we figured out pretty early that we wanted to have sort of a budget pool. So you have to have some chips or some tokens to reflect your budget, right? And that's the budget to make special effects.
Spotlight tokens.
Yeah. If you want to have that in the episode, so okay, you can have that, but only so much, right?
Right.
And then we say, okay, we can have sort of stock footage, or we can have some stock effects, or we have some props that were made specifically for that actor, for that season. So those are a little cheaper because they were kind of tailor-made, but they already exist, and the actor already has, or the costume department has them.
Right.
Yeah, and the way I explained it, when I ran it, was okay. In a regular science fiction game, your guy can just draw your ray gun pistol, and you aim and you shoot your ray gun, and you destroy stuff. But in RetroStar, you have to think in terms of television. So that ray gun prop, that costs something. Somebody made this, right? In the prop department, and then if you shoot it once, that costs at least something for the visual effect and for the sound effect to make it boom, zing, something. So okay, you have to pay the guy who makes the sound, and you have to pay somebody to
make the prop itself. Yeah.
Okay. So that has to come from the effects pool, and then we said, okay, you can still have a lot of games with your ray gun pistol, but you don't actually fire it. So you don't see the hero firing it because we didn't have the budget to put all these labels. So you could just, and then you phrase the scene that way. You say, well, you only have to draw your pistol, but you don't have to shoot up the place. You just threaten somebody, right?
Exactly.
So that's saving on the visual effects. And then we said, okay, if there's somebody who, let's say, a shape changer, and I did see this in a show very recently, and they still do it in shows when they don't have a big budget. You know that this person is an alien shape changer, with that ability.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot show a long CGI scene because that wasn't in the budget, right?
Right.
And then I noticed that sometimes it just put that actor behind a door or put them partially in shadow,
Mm-hmm.
and they come out with a mask, or they're not actually shown, right?
Right.
I was watching this one show from Korea recently, where they had a woman just covered with her jacket or something, and the idea was that she was slowly transforming into this very, very scary werewolf-like creature, but they didn't have the time or the budget to make the
Right.
werewolf, right? So they just said, oh my god, what's happening? And they were just covering her up,
That's fantastic. But I mean, yeah, to like, you need to do something like that to tell the story, but you don't have the budget. Like, I think that's a great aspect of RetroStar too. It's like, kind of helps to make that, it gives it more of like that budget, like 1970s feel. I really like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And the part that I wrote, that actually wound up in the book.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the one with the cruise ship.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no, I don't know my own name. What do we call it? It was the space cruise or the galaxy cruise, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you read that carefully and you read between the lines a little bit, you can see exactly where I took it from, right? So one of my favorite 70s shows is The Love Boat, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And I remember when I first had that idea, it was like a day in November, and I was waiting at a bus station for my bus to work. And it was one of those mornings where I was a little late and the bus was late. And anyway, I was standing there. It was raining. It was a terrible November day. I was not in a good mood, and I said, "Okay, now I'm going to be late. My boss hates me, and everything is kind of dreary, and it's just a depressing day in November." And in this case, I simply put myself into a happier mood, by just like drifting back, in time. Yeah. Put myself into a happy space here. And then out of the blue, while I was at the bus station, I said, okay, when was I really happy, watching television when I was younger? It was when The Love Boat was on, because that was on weekday afternoons after school. They reran The Love Boat.
The Love Boat.
And I said, maybe some of the people who worked on The Love Boat in 78, 79 also worked on one of those science fiction shows. And I think that one of the actresses actually was on both shows. And there's one supporting role actress who also appeared as someone on Buck Rogers in the 25th Century.
Okay, yep. Buck Rogers, 25th Century. That's what it was.
Yeah, because he's going 500 years into the future. He's frozen in 1987 and has to be the 25th century.
Yep.
Yeah, very interesting show, but also still very disco.
Right.
You can see that this was made like even before the 80s. It still has that cover all sexy women disco music.
Sure. Sure.
So I said, okay, this is something that I noticed in the Buck Rogers show, and I also noticed it in The Love Boat. And so I said, maybe in the future, in 2000 something, they'll have cruises in space, and they'll just have all these rich people on a big old spaceship, and there's a space cruise line, and a cruise manager and everything. And then I created my television series around that idea that there's a struggling cruise company, cruise line, right? So they have to get the perfect cruise for their passengers, right?
Yep.
Anyway, and then that spaceship also doesn't come with guns and shields and everything. This is a luxury ship.
Sure.
Maybe they have lifeboats, but it's not military sci-fi.
Yeah, it's not equipped for battle if they run into any trouble or anything like that.
Right. So what I did in an early playtest, I was already running this. I put the players into the roles of crew members, right? So the crew members had to make sure that the passengers were happy, well fed and entertained, right? People had their jobs on the ship, right? And they knew they had to make that cruise successful, keep the customers happy, because also their jobs depend on that, evidently.
Yep.
Anyway, and then at some point, space pirates showed up, right? And then my players, they made it so they actually achieved to take care of the space pirates and make everybody on the cruise ship believe that this was a staged show, right? In the middle of the cruise, those were all actors from another planet, in pirate costumes, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
So people were on the balconies watching, right? And then the captain shows up and he gets involved in this ridiculous fight, fighting 3 pirates left and right. I said, that captain has got so many skills. And he's participating in his performance, right? Right. And that was a very, very nice game session, really.
Yeah.
I was entertained, as much as the players, right? And I ran that toward the end of one particular evening at a con, and it was our local board gaming con, right? There's a board gaming event where tabletop gaming is sort of in its own corner, but in those days there was still some role playing going on. And it turned out that my table toward the end of the night was the loudest table, and people were holding their bellies laughing. Oh, space pirates!
That's awesome.
Other people coming by, from the other tables and from another room across, and said, why are you having such a good time? We want to find out what this game is.
Yeah.
And that was a good one. And this was all in early playtesting days, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And like I said, the series was kind of figured out, and some of the names and the abilities, but we were still using different dice. I had suggested a dice system at the time, and we eventually went with something else. That was a game that took a while to really narrow down and prepare. Originally, it was going to have, I think, 12-sided dice, and then we went with a pool of dice who were rolling 4 dice, I believe. And I'd come up with something called linking dice, or maybe it was Cynthia's idea. I don't remember.
Yep.
I called it linking dice, and like I said, this all went unpublished, right? Because I've been looking at all these other games, and I said, okay, instead of rolling high and rolling low, it's all been done before, how about rolling numbers on the dice that have to be in sequence? So if you have your 4d6, right?
Yep.
4 6-siders, We could make it so that if you end up with 1, 2, 3, and 4, right, all these numbers are in sequence, right? It's like a straight, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I said, okay, on the 6 siders, we could create, 1, 2, 3, 4. It could also be 2, 3, 4, 5, or 3, 4, 5, and 6, to bring them into sequence.
Sure.
And then maybe one of them can be re-rolled if you trigger something else, or you can add a 5th die and something. And then the more dice are linked, the more successes that is.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe only the 1 and the 2 are joined, and then you have a 5 and a 6. Yeah, also those two join, but then the 2 and the 5 don't join. That's the idea, right?
Right.
And maybe I'll use that for something else, because it was unpublished.
I do like the idea. I definitely like the idea.
It's fascinating for a die pool, especially.
And actually, so Zip, you guys in Shattered, you guys have something kind of similar to that, don't you? The dice wrap.
We don't have a traditional die pool in that we're not looking for successes. So it's
right.
We total up the dice and compare the numbers, the sum. But
maybe I'm thinking of a different game then. I thought there was a wrap where if you
there's a thing as you grow, you go up 1d4, 1d6, 1d8, 1d10, and then once you hit 1d10, it wraps back around. That, you keep the d10 and then add a d4 and then keep stacking it from there. Yeah,
that's exactly what I was thinking. All right, cool. Yep. Cool. Yeah.
Some of these rules I sometimes have to see spelled out before me, but
believe me, I know that.
I got rules wrong so much, with other games. Anyway, that there are rules that I created and they seem perfectly logical, but not to somebody else.
Sure.
And I noticed, if it takes me a long time to explain it, that might not be a very good rule.
Yeah. You want to keep the simplicity as best you can, or at least for explanation.
Unless this happens and that happens, and then it's not quite like that. Anyway, but and at one point we were going with the weird linking dice, and joint dice, and then for quite a while, Barack was going to create cards. And I never saw those drafts for the cards, but the idea was to create Retrostar cards. I wasn't too fond of cards because just of the physicality of it, because a card can get bent, it can get creased, right?
Sure.
And my dice I can just use forever.
Yeah.
And I never broke a die, I hardly ever lost a die, but with cards, I said, well, what if you lose one card,
Yeah.
Card falls under the table or behind the sofa, I don't know, or if you're playing poker at home or rummy, if one card gets bent and dented a little,
you know which one it is.
Which card that was, right?
Yep.
Anyway, but they were fond of using cards, and had we gone with that, then maybe it would have been like character cards and then budget cards and special effects cards and something, and plot twist cards. Anyway, and then that was discarded, no pun intended, and then we used the 2d6 option, and I'm quite fine with that. It limits the numerical results. Everything is between 2 and 12, right? But unlike the Apocalypse games, the ones that have the playbooks, right? Ours is only inspired by the Apocalypse. It says so in the book. It's inspired by the Apocalypse, and we call it the intention system. Barack certainly told you about that.
Yeah. I think he did go into it.
Yeah, and. Anyway, then I guess we went with the D6 because those were still the most familiar dice, everybody had at home.
Yep.
And then instead of just having 2, right? Many games that have a 2d6, mechanic really. I know about half a dozen that all went with anyway. But we came up with this thing where you create a pool, but only 2 dice in the pool make the number, right?
Right.
Right. The more you have, the more likely it is to get,
To get a success.
12, right? Yeah.
And one thing that I really like too is about this is like where you can give up narrative control of your character to the showrunner. So if you fail, if you fail, you can keep control. If you succeed, you can give up control, I think is what it was.
If you roll really low, you fail. Like nothing goes in your favor. But then things progress from there. And if you get a medium result, you have an option. You can say, well,
that's right.
I'd rather fail, but I get to keep narrating. Or I succeed, but the GM will narrate something for me. Right.
Right. Yeah.
I like that.
And I definitely like that because there were multiple times throughout our gameplay where that would happen, and you're trying to think like, because it gives you that option. Like, do I want to fail and do I want to keep control and kind of keep whatever my agenda, for lack of a better term, is, kind of keep my agenda going, or give it up and kind of like have to just roll with whatever the GM comes up with. And it led to some interesting things that I don't think our players necessarily were thinking about that Brack threw out there. But it was certainly a great aspect of the gameplay that I had a lot of fun with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one other thing that I want to get into a little bit here, especially you're kind of just especially in the interest of time a little bit. So I get two more things that I kind of want to touch on with you a little bit. One thing is something that you kind of already brought up a little bit in talking about the tabletop community in Germany. We're just we're kind of curious. Conrad was actually the one that wanted me to bring this up to you. He wanted to ask what is the tabletop community like in your neck of the woods? Not necessarily the community, but also, I guess the games in general. You said it kind of leaned a little more towards like high fantasy. Is it vastly different than what it is here in the States, or just kind of curious to see understand what you guys have over there?
I don't know. Like in the span of 30 years, I've seen all kinds of games played, and I've went to many events. Like since the early 2000s, I've been going to these game events. And everyone is a little different. Sometimes a local gaming community can be quite different.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and some people are more board game leaning. Some people want role-playing games to be closer to board games. Some want them closer to video games. Sometimes they want something else entirely. I think right now, everything considered in 2021, it's almost an anything goes market. Like there's room for everybody. It's a vast, hobby really with many corners and many possibilities. I think commercially speaking, the things that sell at the shops are predominantly medieval fantasy.
Okay.
Like the games that actually move books, make money. That's all medieval fantasy with wizards and dragons and stuff.
Yep.
And there are some, local or domestic German games, that are in that very niche. One of them has actually been translated from German into English and is now breaking into the American market. The Dark Eye.
Mm-hmm.
They went to Gen Con, and there's now. Anyway, there's an English language edition you can get somewhere, and that game really has been around, for forever, really, like since the 80s, there's Dungeons and Dragons. There are all the offshoots of Dungeons and Dragons, like Pathfinder, Dungeon Crawl Classics. I think, it's funny because you think of Star Wars as a pretty big thing, right? But the Star Wars role-playing game doesn't move as many units, right? The Conan Barbarian game is a very pretty game to look at, but it doesn't move that many units, right?
Sure.
Anyway, but there's some of that going on. There is certainly Cthulhu.
Okay, yeah.
Cthulhu always happens, very successfully. Wherever I went, there's a guy named Toby, and he's also a GM. And Toby attended some of the same cons as me. Now, all he has to do is take a blank sheet of paper, regular white sheet of paper, and scribble the word Cthulhu on it, right? Doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter where it's at. He writes down the word Cthulhu, and his table is always full. Does,
Yep.
He's
Everybody knows Cthulhu.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really sound like it's a whole heck. I mean, it might be a little bit, I guess, smaller, but it doesn't sound like it's a whole heck of a lot different than over here. It's like, I think, and I mean, Zip, you might even know better than me, but like, I mean, high fantasy, I think, is probably the bigger seller over here than most other genres as well. Like D&D, Pathfinder, things like that.
I know that Kickstarters are also doing a lot. Many things that get a successful Kickstarter, and I don't know. There's so many different stories. There's one publisher who's now got a pretty bad rep, in Germany because of a Kickstarter that it did years ago, and it's still not quite fulfilled, right?
Mm-hmm. Bad campaign.
There are other projects, certainly campaigns that are made by the companies that are already big, right? So it's not like a struggling unknown artist, putting something on Kickstarter.
Right.
No, this is all something by the established guys, right?
Yep.
Now everybody is on Kickstarter, and in fact, last year there was a new gaming shop opening. Last year, new gaming shop opened in this very town, and I've been there, and then I learned that some of the big board games are now happening through Kickstarter.
Oh yeah.
Right. So if you're a retailer, you hear about them maybe on the internet, but you have to wait. But you can also take the retailer option in the Kickstarter.
Right. Yeah.
But I remember, retailers not being too happy with the whole crowdfunding thing.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, it kind of takes their whole model and completely undercuts it. But yeah,
that, and if you have to wait, now you're without product, and it's hard to.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
I know one of my favorite RPGs actually comes out of Germany, I think, by a design firm called Six More Vodka. They make a game called Dege-Genesis, and
Dege-Genesis.
It's a beautiful game. That's all I can say about it. It's fantastic, but we are kind of in like a little bit of a golden age where everybody can get whatever vision they have for a game out there right now, and that's really incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I like, and actually one of the reasons that I really like doing this and sitting down and talking with actually, well, people like both of you guys. Both of you guys are independent, designers, and it's cool because you kind of get those stories and kind of understand where these games are coming from. But you also, I start hearing about other games that you clearly, either one of you guys have known about that I might not know about or whatever. It's cool. You learn a lot about what's out there through things like this. There is a ton of it out there right now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I know, Dege Time really tends to focus on a lot of like the therapeutic aspect of gaming. We've seen a lot of stuff come up in the news over the years about that. Have you, Norbert, have you seen any sort of movement in that realm and at where you are about using it maybe to, like help people deal with difficult social situations or anything like that?
That's a good question. I cannot give you a definitive answer, but
sure. That's quite all right.
Quite a lot of people who I met, at the conventions, and people who have supported games or demoed games. They've worked on games and authored games. A lot of them are school teachers by day, right?
Right. Yeah, finding that. Yeah.
They were somewhere in our public school system, and also met some people who are psychology majors. Anyway, they studied psychology, sociology, things like that.
Okay.
A lot of people from the social sciences on podcasts, for example. And I noticed that now that gamers get to be a certain age, I'm hitting my late 40s now, and I noticed a lot of my peers really in the hobby, they all have grown up kids now.
Yep.
Maybe like smaller kids or teenagers. Then gamers start thinking, how do I play this with my young ones, right? I know gaming groups where it's basically the dad running Dungeons and Dragons, for his own children, right?
Right.
for his buddy's children, right? His neighbor's children. Anyway, this is one family. They probably wouldn't be happy about me saying so, but it's almost like a dynastic, right? A dynastic procedure. It's like the son has to graduate, before the father, right? Anyway, let me say, some of the older GMs who've done this for much younger players, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this would also include me when I next go to an actual convention. And I'm 47, and then I have players who are 30 years younger than me, right? Some I have to put myself into their space a little bit, because maybe a 17-year-old wouldn't know as much about 70s television as I know.
Right.
It's probably not my business telling them about Carter and the oil crisis and Watergate. But anyway, they want to have an entertaining game. But what I was going to say is that some of the people who spend a great deal of time running games for kids, they want to make sure that everybody feels well, right? And I've heard of that some kids might be like acting up a bit or acting unruly, or they had problems, and they overcame some of that in gaming, right? And there are a few people who I sometimes talk to. Now, I don't know how they do it, and I have not been there in the room with them. And now with coronavirus and everything, of course, I was never physically there, right?
Right.
Anyway, there are a few who have sort of this teaching and psychology background, and they've gone to their local schools and their youth centers. There are a lot of youth centers, and sometimes the conventions are at youth centers as well. They basically do an afternoon after-school program with the kids. They volunteer with I think the PTA or with a local school and say, well, I want to do something with the kids, after school, and it is not all nonsense. It's not just like slaying dragons, and
right.
bloody tales of whatever. So they put it into a teaching context and say, well, this improves their math skills, their team building skills, and I think especially problem solving.
Definitely.
You're a group of adventurers, right? You cannot do this by yourself. The wizard cannot do it by himself. Wizard is pretty good, but he won't do it by himself. The warrior won't do it by himself. The scout won't do it by himself. But you are a team, and everybody's doing something on the team, and the team succeeds, right?
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the interesting points you made that I really hadn't really considered until now, but it is really incredible, is having some of like the older generation of players and GMs being able to connect with the new generation of players that's coming in and like find that common ground that sometimes is so difficult. and now we can kind of meet together over this game and understand each other a little better. And I don't know how it is in Germany, but I know here in the US, we really need a lot of that. So.
Yeah, tell me about it. No, and it's, I've even, you know, like I know, I know a former coworker of mine. She's, her and her husband are really into gaming, and that's how they've really connected with their kids. Is just like that. I can't remember if it was her or if it was her husband that was running the game, but one of them ran the game and the other played, and they all kind of stuck around, and it was a bonding moment for everybody in the family, and they all they became a lot stronger and closer together, and it was just cool because for exactly the reason you just said, you because of the age gap. A lot of times you do have there's a lot of trouble finding like a middle ground, common ground between kids and adults, but you kind of get into these role-playing games. They're almost timeless, and you can kind of like fall into these games, and anybody from any age can just kind of pick them up, play, and have fun. It's really cool to see something like that happen, and it be this accessible, in today's day and age.
Mm. Yeah. In fact, one of my cleverest, best players in recent years was an 11-year-old girl.
Awesome.
And I remember this was one of the summer events, 2016. Must have been, yeah. Okay, let's just say it's 2016.
Sure.
And it was a very hot afternoon, and was busy at this con, like medium-sized con. Very, very, very hot summer day. And then this guy shows up. He's about 40, and he's got his 11-year-old daughter with him. And he said, well, I want to go over play this war game with my friends, but my daughter isn't into that. Can I leave my daughter with you, at your table, he doesn't know me or anything, right?
Right.
He trusted me his 11-year-old daughter, right? And I was running icons, I had icons on the table. Icons is a little cartoony looking, right? And I said, okay, this will be child safe. It'll be a family game. And then I hand out character sheets, and I explained that the English stuff on it. At the time, it wasn't translated, right? In fact, that was one of the days that made me decide to actually get this out in German, right? Because people were always asking me for translation.
Sure.
Anyway, so this 11-year-old sits next to me, and then the rest is like 30-something gamers, right? Full table. The 11-year-old completely takes over the group.
Fantastic.
Superhero. She's got it all figured out, and she was the team leader, the commander. She knew exactly what powers look like. She was also familiar with some of the actual Marvel characters, So looking at the book, she tells me, "Oh, that one looks just like the Hulk, but in a different color." Right?
Oh, that's awesome.
This one is like Spider-Man, and this one is like such and such. She's got it figured out, and I'm still, trying to explain to the grown-ups, right, to the 30-something, right? And then she's already a scene ahead, and then she runs to the playground, right? Okay, I'm running to the swing on the playground, swing for a bit. Then I come back and she's into the game. Have you defeated that robot? No, I'll show you how to defeat the robot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
By the end of that afternoon, I said, oh God, it's so heartwarming,
Yeah, seriously.
I have to catch my breath, I cry a bit, I go, gaming is in really good hands.
Yes, that's awesome.
That's in good hands, I'm relieved.
Yeah, by far.
Incredible.
That's an incredible story. I like that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, hey, Norbert, I certainly appreciate your time here tonight. We went a little bit over an hour here, and I usually try to keep this about like a half an hour or so, which is totally fine. We got a lot of cool stuff out of you, and I certainly appreciate everything that you kind of went back through and refreshed your memory on, and everything you kind of brought out tonight. So thank you very much for all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you too. I'm blabbering, I cannot stop.
No, that's quite all right.
Thing, get me started on tabletop games, and
That's okay. You said you used to be a wrestling fan. I'm a wrestling fan. You started me on wrestling, and I don't shut up. So I'm the same way. Matter of fact, that's part of the reason I'm trying to wrap up. I'm actually doing a wrestling podcast in about 25 or 30 minutes. So gotta switch hats. Gaming hat, wrestling trunks. Nobody wants to envision me in wrestling trunks. People, don't do that. Don't think about me in wrestling trunks. Zip, thank you for filling in tonight too, man. I appreciate you coming on and helping out.
Thank you, and thank you, Norbert, for taking the time. It was really cool to get a different perspective from a different developer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you both very much.
Yeah, and when we do play Cartoon Action Hour, we might be in touch again. Because I think it might be cool to get. Because I know Cynthia. I think we're gonna have Cynthia on the show. It might be cool to have like you, Cynthia, Barack on the show, and then talk about Cartoon Action Hour. We'll discuss. But I certainly appreciate it.
Fine, yeah. I mean, I don't want to fight over the Game Master spot there. Something's going to happen. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. And this has been another episode of the Degecast. We will see you next time. Take care.